Yeah, I'm working on this other book right now on screenwriting, which I wrote actually during a sabbatical that I got from San Francisco State. They were kind enough to give me a sabbatical, and I wrote this book called Writing in Pictures, Screenwriting Made Mostly Painless, with mostly in parentheses. And that book is coming out in early 2012 from Vintage/Anchor, which is part of Random House in the U.S., and Faber in the U.K. And those are the two best publishers for film books, I think. I've had several books published by Faber and Faber. They're a terrific company in England, and Random House is the leading publisher in America. So it'll get really well published and promoted. And it's a textbook on screenwriting. It's a kind of a somewhat lighthearted but serious book about how to write a screenplay. And when I came here, started teaching screenwriting, I actually taught it at another school before. I started looking for textbooks to use, and I read a lot of them, and I didn't like any of them really very much. And the reason was that most of them tell you how to write formula films that they think will sell to Hollywood. And I think that's kind of stupid, because anybody who thinks they can figure out what's saleable is fooling himself, because it's sort of a crapshoot what sells, and you can't. If anybody knew what was commercial, we'd be as rich as Steven Spielberg. Maybe he knows, but there aren't too many people who can figure this out ahead of time. It's kind of, you should write what you care about and hope that people will buy it, and hope that it will be successful. But the odds against anything being bought are long, and then the odds against any particular film being a hit are kind of long too. So to think you can write a thing according to formula based on some book and you'll get rich is really idiotic. And the New Yorker did a cartoon a few years ago of screenwriting section at a bookstore like Barnes & Noble, and there was a big sign over it that said, "Win the lottery." And that's the attitude that some people have with these books. And so I think that's actually deplorable, because I think it sends a bad message to people that you should write screenplays to get rich, and also it's unfair to people because it's misleading them. And I hate to think of all the people who will move to Hollywood and write screenplays and then get rejected and then feel really depressed. And so I'm trying to write a book that's more realistic. And the other thing I find missing, oddly enough, from these books is they don't actually, most of them teach you actually how to write a screenplay, the craft of what makes a screenplay different from a novel or a short story or a play, and how to construct a screenplay and how to write a good one. And so what I do is I use the same method I do in my basic screenwriting class here at 355 Screenwriting 1. I found that rather than having people who've never written a screenplay try to write an original short film, which is really hard, it's hard enough to learn how to write a screenplay without coming up with a good idea. I have them all adapt a short story that I give them. I give them a choice of two. One is Hemingway's Big Two-Hearted River, and the other is Flannery O'Connor's Late Encounter with the Enemy. And they pick one or the other, and then they adapt it, and we all talk about these two stories, and we really study them. And the other reason for doing this, not only do they work with a great collaborator, basically, they have a good story to work with, and they can focus on the craft, but the other reason is that we're all interested in each other's story when we're talking about it. Because when I taught screenwriting before and I said just write an original, a lot of times people's eyes would glaze over when somebody was talking about her script. They didn't care because it wasn't their script. This way we're all talking about the same stories. And it works very well as a method. Almost everybody who takes my basic class comes out knowing how to write a professional quality screenplay, which is quite an achievement in a short 3-month period. That, like one of my students wrote an evaluation saying, "Finally I've learned a marketable craft," which I thought was very nice, because film school, one of the problems with being a film major, you can get a degree, but there's no guarantee you'll get a job. It's not like being a dentist or something. You get a degree and you go off and you get hired as a dentist or an engineer or something like that. A film job, you don't get a job because you have a degree. You still have to figure out a way to sell yourself, And so, but screenwriting, at least you have a professional skill if you take my classes and do the work. And most of them wind up writing good scripts, and we have a lot of fun in those classes. It's fun to do this, and then they can move on to write original stories, is what I tell them. In our advanced classes, they write original screenplays, but by then they know the craft. And so I walk them in this book through the craft, all the stages of writing a script, from finding a story and then analyzing the story and then writing outlines and writing a treatment and gradually writing a screenplay and all the things that go into it. And I take a different short story and I walk them through that, and so I think it was a fun book, and I think people will find it very useful. But it's not so much telling you that you're going to get rich or how to get rich or how to sell a script. It's mostly like how to actually write a screenplay, which is actually kind of unusual. And my last chapter is sort of about how to get a job in the business. The first thing I tell people is get a job, and I don't mean a film job. I mean get a job like work in a restaurant or something, or like I have a student, like a very good screenwriting student, who went to Hollywood and got a job in an insurance company where he's working now, and he's writing screenplays on the side, but he's smart enough to have a job where he pays his rent and he's not starving. And he's a very industrious guy, and he's already had a film made, so I'm sure he'll be successful. But when I went to Hollywood, I had a job as a newspaper reporter, and that's what paid my bills. Because even if you're talented and successful, it's going to take you 2 or 3 years at least to start making a living off it, if you're lucky. And some people could take much longer, So that's my first piece of advice: get a job. That's not always what they want to hear. They want to hear get rich.
That's really helpful, though. Like, a lot of film students don't realize that.
Right.
Like the dream is too big and out there that they kind of not notice the reality of it.
Yeah, they start thinking about that when they get to be seniors, and a lot of them come in and tell me, they get a little anxious and they start saying, what am I going to do now? So what I usually tell them is have some screenplays that you can show people, because talk is not going to get you a job, but evidence of your talent will get you a job. Like Steven Spielberg made amateur films for years, and he made a professional quality film called Amblin when he was 21, which is what got him his contract at Universal, because it was so good. And so that's what you have to do, is make a short film that's really good, that shows your talent, or write a really good screenplay that you can show people. Sometimes they'll say, yeah, that's great, but what else? What other ideas do you have? And then it's good if you have a couple more scripts. They might buy the other ones. Or they might say, come back with another one, But at least you have evidence of what you can do. So that's, it doesn't matter if you say I'm a great screenwriter, they won't believe you unless they can read a good script. So that's what I tell people: if you're really serious about it, find a way to make a living so you can not be too broke and anxious, and then do a lot of work. I spent years writing screenplays before I sold one. It took me about 10 years before I sold one. And I wrote something like 60 short films, and I made about 6 of them when I was a student. It was very expensive back then to buy film, and I didn't have much money, so every once in a while I scraped together about $400 and made a film. But I was teaching myself by writing feature-length scripts, and I finally sold one after I'd written about 7, I think. And then I started selling a number of them, and wrote about 9 TV specials, and I basically retired as a screenwriter in 1984 to write books, but occasionally I get lured back to write a film, usually a documentary. Somebody will call me up and ask me to write a documentary, which I do occasionally. And I appear in a lot of documentaries as a talking head, usually about film history. And I'm sometimes a consultant on a documentary. Like there was a film called Becoming John Ford that I was a consultant on, and I was interviewed a lot in that film, and so I do things like that. I've been in a lot of those films. I'm in a new film called Dreaming the Quiet Man, which is an Irish film about John Ford's The Quiet Man. I'm one of the experts interviewed in that film.